And good afternoon, Bertie. And I want to say thanks for coming into the committee here to share your insights on the negotiations leading up to the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. And I know you paid tribute to the many political, the political parties in the North who took risks to ensure that an agreement was reached, and to those on the international basis that actually played a huge role as well. But there's one thing that you mentioned and I just want to focus on, which is the close collaboration between the British and Irish governments. Now, I suppose it's no secret that the current relationship between British and Irish governments is far from ideal and is probably at its lowest ebb in quite a number of years. So, do you think that the Tory government is undermining the Good Friday Agreement, and particularly the human rights aspects of the agreement? Because they have resisted bringing in human rights legislation, and they've also subverted aspects of the agreement to do with victims of the conflict. Like, they've refused victims access to inquests and courts, and they're giving amnesty to their own forces. So I suppose I want you just to dwell on the importance of a good relationship between the two governments as co-guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement, but also if you think that they are undermining the agreement by the legacy legislation. Thank you.
I don't think they're intentionally undermining the agreement, but they clearly haven't been helpful during the course of this calendar year. Bringing forward the legislation was probably the one thing that proved very unhelpful, and certainly annoyed greatly the Irish government, and rightly so, because the facts of the matter is that since last October, the EU have been trying their utmost and put forward comprehensive positions. There may not have been solutions, but at least there were positions to the UK government. And that's a year ago. There were a few brief talks in February, but really didn't come to anything. And it's only been recently that we've seen some progress with the new individuals involved, in the new ministers involved. So the question is, I was going to say the British Prime Minister, but I don't know who the British Prime Minister is. Changed on the way in. But anyway, well, whoever the British Prime Minister is, hopefully they will take a bit of a proactive position. Quite frankly, I didn't think it was helpful what the British Prime Minister of yesterday said. So maybe whoever's there tomorrow might say something different. But what she said yesterday was that even if there was negotiations, that what was in the legislation would be the bottom line. Now, I never tried negotiations that I declared the bottom line before I went into the negotiations. So that's clearly not going to solve anything. But having said that, at least the British government at official level and some of the outgoing state before Stephen Baker came in, and Chris Eden-Harris, they had put together a comprehensive paper of what the EU were offering, what their position was, and where the compromises might lie, and where they wouldn't compromise at all. So at least that work is put in. So the negotiations that started last week with James Cleverly and his people should be going somewhere. But let's be honest about it. I'd say the time span of the last 10 days in trying to get the British government to focus on anything was probably fairly poor. So hopefully we'll see over the next few weeks. But the only thing we've seen the last week is that the Secretary of State in Northern Ireland is saying that he'll call election next week. That's the only statement, the fact that we've got. Now, whether that'll happen or not happen. But anyway, I think it'd be an awful pity. I mean, to be honest, I think the EU did a very good job last October. I think that was a good opening position. It was a position that we could have got fairly serious negotiations in. I was at a meeting in Brussels about a month ago, which was organised by MEP Barry Andrews, and that had all the parties in the north there, and they spent a day and a full day and the night before with Marek Kovic discussing the issues, and the EU were setting out in really good detail what they thought were, fair issues. They went through that they dealt with the issue of medicines, that was out of the protocol altogether, that they were prepared to make changes within the protocol, that they had they looked at the Trusted Traders initiative, where you could have a red box to try and deal with the internal trade position, which seems to be the DUP's difficulty. So there are a lot of positives, but to answer your question directly, it takes two to tango, and if the British government don't get into the discussions, well, it's very difficult to see it. And just hopefully whoever the next British Prime Minister is, and the officials, hopefully they can get down to real negotiations. But realistically, it's hard to see much happening before Friday week. We'll have to see where that brings us.
And the legacy legislation that they're talking about introducing?
Yeah, the legacy legislation. I mean, to be frank, I suppose I'm on the wings of this. I cannot see these legislations being passed. It's doing nothing to help anyone. I mean, you're dealing with legislation that everybody is against. Yeah. And it's. If you could imagine an hour of Oireachtas, could you imagine trying to bring legislation that every political party was against? It sounds extraordinary. I never saw it happen. So if legislation is to be foisted on Northern Ireland on something that every political party is against, it's very unhelpful. And in fairness, I have to say, I always took the position, I've said this publicly many, many times, Charlie Flanagan, when he was Minister for Justice, in the Stormont House legislation and the Stormont House Agreement. I mean, that was an agreement of the parties at the time. I was a big supporter of the Stormont House. That was a hard effort to actually achieve that legislation, or that agreement at the time. And but it's like a lot of other things in the last number of years. Everybody agrees, and then one group say, no, we're not having it, change their mind afterwards. And we've had that from Boris, we've had it from Secretaries of State, we've had it from foreign ministers, that everyone agrees, and then nothing happens. From the legacy point of view, I'm still a supporter of Charlie Flanagan's legislation and agreements that he did at that time.